In a small town on the outskirts of Detroit, where the air smells of gasoline and faded dreams, lives a young woman named Carmen. At 28, she's already faced more hardship than most people ever will in a lifetime. Raised in the gritty streets of the city, Carmen grew up without her parents, losing them at a tender age. But it wasn't just the absence of her parents that shaped her. It was the relentless fight to survive, to make a difference, to help those who have no voice. And for Carmen, that fight is Hope Haven, a rundown shelter for abandoned, disabled children, nestled in the heart of a town that doesn't really care. Despite her unwavering determination, Carmen's life isn't easy. Every day feels like an uphill battle. The shelter, constantly on the brink of closing its doors, is a testament to her resilience. Money is scarce. Volunteers are even rarer. And the community? Well, they're skeptical at best, indifferent at worst. Yet Carmen doesn't back down. She can't afford to. One fateful morning, as she pulls into a shabby gas station with her old, beat-up car, something changes. At the pump next to hers stands a man, tall, with a rugged look, tattoos covering his arms, and a leather jacket adorned with a symbol that's hard to ignore. He's struggling. His bike, a massive machine that's seen better days, sits idle as he tries, and fails, to pay for his gas. The cashier, a grumpy, middle-aged man with a chip on his shoulder, isn't having it. As the crowd gathers, the whispers begin. Who does he think he is? He doesn't belong here. But Carmen, who's no stranger to being judged, steps forward. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't second-guess herself. She pays for the biker's gas, quietly, without expecting anything in return. What she doesn't know yet is that her simple act of kindness will set off a chain of events that will shake the very foundations of this small town, and change her life forever. Carmen's life had never been easy, but it was hers, and she fought for it every day. Born and raised in Detroit, she'd seen firsthand how hard life could get. The city, once a booming metropolis full of hope and promise, had long since fallen into a state of disrepair. Empty buildings, broken dreams, and forgotten neighborhoods were all too familiar to her. Carmen wasn't just a product of this environment. She was determined to make sure she wasn't another casualty of it. Her parents had passed away when she was just 8 years old, and she'd been bounced around from one relative to the next. There was no stability in her life, no place to call home, until Miss Clara, her grandmother, took her in. Miss Clara was a force of nature. She was strong, compassionate, and above all, resilient. She raised Carmen in a modest house on the outskirts of Detroit, a place that wasn't much, but it was their home. The house had its quirks, creaky floors, leaky pipes, and windows that always seemed to rattle during storms, but to Carmen, it was the safest place in the world. Miss Clara taught Carmen 2 things. Never apologize for who you are, and always fight for the ones who don't have a voice. Those lessons shaped Carmen into the woman she had become. She wasn't afraid of hard work, and she wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. At 28, she had built a life dedicated to helping others, particularly the abandoned and disabled children who had no one else to turn to. Hope Haven wasn't much, just a small, crumbling shelter tucked away at the edge of town. The blue paint had long since faded, the walls cracked, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. But to Carmen, it was everything. She had poured her heart and soul into the shelter, and although it was barely hanging on, she refused to give up. Every day, she worked tirelessly, caring for the kids who lived there, making sure they had a safe place to sleep, food to eat, and most importantly, someone who cared. The shelter was a lifeline in a town that had long forgotten what it meant to show kindness to those in need. But Carmen was used to the struggle. She knew that running Hope Haven was a battle she couldn't win alone. There were times when the bills piled up, and the donations were nowhere to be found. Volunteers came and went, and the community seemed indifferent to the cause. Still, Carmen kept fighting, because she couldn't stop. Not for her own sake, but for the kids who depended on her. She couldn't give up on them, not when they had nobody else. And so, Carmen continued her daily routine, walking the streets, handing out flyers, begging for help, all while being met with cold shoulders and skeptical eyes. But that day, something unexpected happened. When she crossed paths with the biker at the gas station, everything began to change. It was a quiet morning at the local gas station, one of the few that still managed to stay open in this forgotten part of Detroit. Carmen pulled her old rusted sedan into one of the pumps, the engine sputtering as she parked. The gas station wasn't much, just a small building with cracked windows and a flickering neon sign that barely stayed lit. The air smelled like a mix of gasoline, stale coffee, and the faint odor of exhaust from the steady stream of cars that came and went. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, and the world outside had no impact on what went on here. Carmen had just finished paying for her gas when she noticed a commotion at the pump next to hers. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood there, his motorcycle parked awkwardly at the side. He wore a black leather jacket, the faded emblem of Hell's Angels on the back. Tattoos covered his forearms, stretching up to his sleeves, marking him with the kind of history most people in Detroit only heard about in whispers. His face was strong, rugged, with a jaw that seemed to have been carved from stone. He was everything Carmen had learned to avoid: rough, distant, and, to many in this neighborhood, trouble. The cashier, a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl on his face, was giving the biker a hard time. "You think you can just waltz in here and get gas for free?" he barked, his voice dripping with disdain. The biker's motorcycle sat idle, the chrome gleaming under the dull sunlight, but the attendant was having none of it. "I'm telling you, man, I don't have cash on me," the biker said, his voice rough but calm. "I thought I could pay with my phone, but this place doesn't take that." The cashier scoffed loudly, shaking his head as he stepped closer. "You bikers always think the rules don't apply to you. You come in here with your fancy bikes and leather jackets, thinking you're above everybody else." Carmen stood there, watching, her heart sinking. She knew exactly what it was like to be judged by your appearance, to be dismissed before anyone ever gave you a chance. The crowd that had gathered around the pumps started whispering among themselves, their voices full of judgment and suspicion. She could hear the mutterings: "Another one of those bikers, probably a criminal, and why should we help him? Look at him." Carmen's hands tightened around the handle of her purse, a familiar, tight knot forming in her stomach. She had heard it all before, people making assumptions based on nothing more than a look or a label. But this time, something in her couldn't just stand by and watch. The way they were treating this man, a stranger who didn't deserve this hostility, it struck a chord deep within her. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything that had been wrong with this town for years. The judgments, the prejudice, the way people turned their backs on each other. She couldn't let it happen again. Not this time. Without thinking, Carmen stepped forward. The crowd seemed to freeze as she walked toward the counter. She didn't look at the cashier, didn't acknowledge the people watching her. She simply pulled out the last of the cash she had in her wallet, which was already stretched thin from the bills at Hope Haven. The money she had planned to use for groceries or perhaps to buy more flyers to hand out. It didn't matter. "I'll pay for his gas," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. The cashier blinked, taken aback by her sudden intervention. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, Carmen could hear nothing but the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The biker, still standing there with his hands in his pockets, turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice low, rough like gravel. But Carmen wasn't backing down. She wasn't asking for permission. "I know I don't," she said, glancing up at him with a calm, unwavering gaze. "But I won't stand by and let you get treated like this for no reason. We've all been there, judged by our appearance, our past. But that doesn't make it right." The cashier shot her a glare, clearly unhappy with the turn of events. "Your money, your mistake," he muttered, as if dismissing her entirely. Carmen ignored him, her focus solely on the biker now. She handed the cashier the money, and as the receipt printed, she turned to leave. The crowd slowly began to disperse, their whispers fading into the background. But Carmen didn't care. She had done what she believed was right, no matter the consequences. As she walked toward her car, the biker followed her, his heavy boots crunching on the cracked pavement. "You didn't have to do that," he said again, this time more quietly, his tone softer. Carmen didn't look back. She simply shook her head. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." For a brief moment, she thought she heard him chuckle. "I guess I owe you one," he said. She smiled faintly, without turning. "You don't owe me anything." And with that, she climbed into her old car and drove off, leaving behind the gas station, the whispers, and the judgment. But what she didn't know was that the decision she made today, one simple, kind act, would change everything. It would be the beginning of a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of this small town and transform her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. 3 days passed, and life in Detroit carried on as usual. Carmen was no stranger to routine. Each morning, she'd rise before dawn to make sure the kids at Hope Haven had a warm meal and were ready for the day. The shelter was a constant whirlwind of activity, feeding, cleaning, and managing a million small tasks. But the harsh truth never changed. The shelter was on the brink of collapse, held together by Carmen's willpower and a dwindling number of donations. Every night, when she closed the door behind her, she'd lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer she could keep up this fight. Sometimes, the weight of it all felt too heavy to bear. The lonely hours, the judgment from people who didn't understand, the never-ending struggle to get people to care, it was exhausting. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Then, on the 3rd day after helping the biker at the gas station, something unexpected happened. The morning had started like any other, until Carmen stepped out the door of the shelter and froze. The unmistakable roar of engines filled the air. Low, thunderous, like the ground itself was vibrating under the weight of 1,000 pounds of steel. She squinted into the distance, trying to make sense of the noise. The sound got louder. The gravel in the parking lot trembled beneath her boots. A cloud of dust rose up from the road leading to the shelter. It was a convoy, dozens of motorcycles, their chrome glinting in the late morning sun. Carmen's heart skipped a beat as the bikes slowly approached, the rumble of their engines almost shaking the earth beneath her feet. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him, to return. The motorcycles came to a stop one by one, their engines cutting off in unison. Carmen's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, all she could do was stare. A dozen bikers, their black leather vests emblazoned with the infamous Hells Angels logo, stepped off their bikes, their boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. They moved in sync, their presence commanding, yet oddly calm. At the front of the pack, there was Jake, the man she had helped at the gas station just days ago. His sharp gray eyes met hers from across the gravel lot. For a moment, Carmen's legs felt weak beneath her. She hadn't expected to see him again, certainly not like this. The rest of the bikers unloaded their bikes with ease, unloading boxes from a pickup truck that had followed behind them. Food, medical supplies, clothes, blankets, things the shelter desperately needed but couldn't afford. For a moment, Carmen stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "Hey, you!" Jake called out, his voice breaking through the quiet chaos. Carmen blinked, finally snapping out of her trance. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes scanning the group behind him. "Jake?" she asked, her voice shaky. He gave her a small, almost apologetic smile, his rough face softening for a brief moment. "Yeah, it's me," he said. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, but we figured you could use a little help." Carmen stood still, trying to process what was happening. "Help? What is all this?" Jake motioned to the boxes being unloaded. "Supplies for the shelter," he explained. "Food, medical supplies, everything you could need. We've got more back at the truck. It's all yours." Carmen's heart raced. I don't understand," she stammered. Why are you doing this?" Jake stepped closer, his eyes steady and unwavering. "Because you helped me," he said simply, "when nobody else would. I won't forget that." As Carmen stood there, her mind spun with 1,000 questions. The tension in the air became palpable. What did this mean? Why had he brought so many people? Was this just a random act of kindness, or was there something more behind it? Carmen had seen enough in her life to know that nothing ever came without a price. "I didn't do it for a reward," she said slowly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do." Jake nodded, his expression serious now. "And we're here because it's the right thing to do, too. We've been watching you, Carmen. What you're doing here, it matters. And we're not going to let you do it alone." Carmen's chest tightened. "You've been watching me? Why?" Jake paused for a moment, his eyes flicking to the other bikers before returning to her. "Because we know what it's like to be judged. To be written off before you even get a chance to prove who you really are. People like you, people like us, we get overlooked. We get pushed aside. But we're not backing down anymore." Before Carmen could respond, Miss Clara appeared on the porch, her cane tapping against the wood. Her sharp gaze moved from the bikers to Carmen, then to the stacks of supplies. "What is all this, girl?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Carmen's heart pounded. She had no idea how to explain this, how to make sense of the situation. Her grandmother, though loving and fiercely protective, had a deep mistrust of outsiders, especially those with tattoos and leather vests. Jake smiled kindly at Miss Clara. "It's a long story, ma'am," he said. "But we're here to help." Miss Clara raised an eyebrow, studying him for a long moment. Then, to Carmen's surprise, she nodded slowly. "Well, I reckon it's about time somebody stepped up." The tension in the air remained thick, but something shifted. The bikers began to unload the truck, bringing in more boxes, as Carmen and Miss Clara stood back and watched. Carmen's mind raced as she tried to process everything. She had helped a stranger, and now that stranger had come back with his entire crew to help her in return. But even as the bikers unloaded boxes, the whispers of the town began to swirl. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, murmuring to each other. A few brave souls stepped onto the street, watching the scene unfold with a mix of confusion and skepticism. And then, one by one, they began to approach. As the days passed, Carmen found herself in a daze. What had started as a simple act of kindness, paying for a stranger's gas, had evolved into something far greater than she could have imagined. The Hell's Angels had returned, bringing with them not just supplies for Hope Haven, but something more valuable, hope. It wasn't just about the food or the clothes, the medical supplies or the toys. It was about the fact that someone, anyone, had noticed. They had seen her struggle and decided it was worth stepping up to help. Jake, the leader of the group, seemed to understand that in a way no one else had. He didn't just bring things to the shelter, he brought understanding. It was in the way he spoke to her, the way he saw beyond the tattoos and leather jackets. He saw the woman fighting to keep the light of hope alive for the children who had nowhere else to go. He wasn't just helping her because of the kindness she'd shown him. No, it was because he believed in what she was doing. And that belief was contagious. Each day, more and more bikers showed up, unloading trucks of supplies, helping to repair the dilapidated roof, repainting the walls, and fixing the broken fences. The town had never seen anything like it. At first, the locals stayed away. Some even crossed the street when they saw the Hell's Angels unloading their gear, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. But Carmen noticed something else. It wasn't just the bikers working. The people of Plainwood, the ones who had always turned a blind eye to the shelter, were starting to watch. And some of them were starting to wonder. By the end of the week, the shelter had transformed. The walls were freshly painted, the roof no longer leaked, and the playground outside had a new swing set. The kids, who had once played in the dirt with nothing but their imagination, now had toys, books, and space to run. It was the first time in a long while that Carmen had felt like she could breathe. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to change everything overnight. But it was something. One afternoon, as the workers packed up for the day, Carmen stood on the porch, watching the bikers load their bikes. Jake was talking to Miss Clara, who had, surprisingly, warmed to him. The older woman had a way of sizing people up, and it was clear she had seen something in Jake that made her trust him. As Jake finished loading his bike, he caught Carmen's eye from across the yard. He gave her a small smile, one that held a depth of gratitude she hadn't expected. "Hey," he called out, walking toward her. "I know this isn't easy, but I want you to know we're not going anywhere." Carmen's heart tightened as she tried to find the right words. "I don't know what to say. I never expected this. None of this." Jake shrugged, his expression softening. "You don't need to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing good work here." Carmen nodded slowly. It was hard to explain the sense of peace that had washed over her. She wasn't used to people believing in her. Not in this town, not when she had spent so many years fighting for recognition that never came. But Jake and his crew, these tough, weathered men who had lived through their own battles, had given her something invaluable. They had given her a sense of belonging. For the first time, she wasn't alone in this fight. As Jake prepared to leave, Carmen took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." "No problem," he replied with a smile. "We're family now. And family doesn't leave." It was a simple statement, but it resonated deeply with Carmen. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a family, a community. And that feeling was stronger than any supply drop or donation. It was a reminder that the strength of a community was built on more than just resources. It was built on people showing up for each other, even when the world told them not to. The next day, Carmen found herself walking the streets of Plainwood again, but this time something had changed. She held her head higher, her steps more confident. The stares she had once received now felt different. She still caught people's eyes, but there was something different about the way they looked at her. The judgment, the suspicion, they were still there, but it was beginning to fade. In their place was something else, curiosity. She noticed a few people glance toward the shelter as she passed. Some of them even waved. It was small, but it was something. It wasn't just the bikers who had changed the shelter, it was the shift in how the town saw it. Slowly but surely, Hope Haven was becoming something more than just a run-down building on the outskirts of town. It was becoming a symbol of what could happen when people cared. Over the next few weeks, more and more people from Plainwood started to show up at the shelter, offering to help in their own ways. Some brought donations. Others volunteered their time. The local diner owner, who had been one of the loudest critics of the shelter, showed up with boxes of food and a promise to provide a hot meal for the kids every week. And Carmen, who had once fought alone, now had an army behind her. She realized that, slowly but surely, the town was changing. The Hells Angels had sparked a fire in Plainwood, one that no amount of prejudice or doubt could put out. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the shelter, Carmen stood on the porch again, watching the kids play. Miss Clara was sitting in her favorite rocking chair, knitting. Jake and a few of the bikers were sitting nearby, chatting and laughing. It felt like peace. Real peace. Jake caught her eye and gave her a nod. He didn't need to say anything. The gratitude between them was unspoken, but it was there. Carmen smiled and turned back to the kids, their laughter filling the air. It wasn't just Hope Haven that had changed, it was the town. And for the first time in a long time, Carmen truly believed that anything was possible. As the days went by, the changes in Plainwood became more noticeable. The once skeptical townspeople were beginning to soften, and some had even started offering their support to Hope Haven. Carmen found herself balancing between keeping the shelter afloat and navigating the delicate shift in the community's attitude. She'd never been the type to sit back and relax, not when the future of the children was on the line, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. However, the peace didn't last. Trouble, as it often did in Plainwood, was waiting just around the corner. It all started one crisp afternoon when Carmen was inside the shelter, organizing some of the new donations that had come in. The sound of motorcycles, loud and growling, echoed down the street, pulling her attention to the windows. She didn't need to look twice to know who it was. The Hells Angels were back, Jake and his crew. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. The air was thick with tension. Carmen walked outside just in time to see Jake, his face harder than she had ever seen it, talking with a few of the bikers. A small group of town officials, including the mayor, stood nearby, arms crossed, looking less than pleased. Their faces were grim, their eyes scanning the bikers and the shelter with a mix of suspicion and disdain. "What's going on?" Carmen asked, walking toward Jake, her voice cautious. She could sense something was off. Jake's expression softened when he saw her, but there was an edge to his voice that she didn't miss. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. "Seems like some of the folks in town don't like the attention Hope Haven's getting. They're worried about the bikers being here." Carmen's stomach tightened. Worried about the bikers? They're here to help. They're the reason this place hasn't fallen apart. "I know that, Carmen," Jake said, running a hand through his hair. "But not everyone in town sees it that way. There's talk, serious talk, that the shelter's attracting the wrong kind of attention. And now they want to shut it down." A cold chill ran down Carmen's spine. She had always known that some people would never accept her efforts, but the thought that they might actually succeed in shutting Hope Haven down was unbearable. The town had no idea how hard she'd fought, how many nights she'd stayed up, worrying about where the next meal for the kids would come from, how she'd scraped together enough money to keep the lights on. And now, after all that work, after everything she'd done, they were threatening to take it all away. "Shut it down? Are they serious?" Carmen asked, her voice rising in disbelief. Jake nodded, his face hard. "They're not just talking. They're bringing in outside help to make it happen. Some lawyer from the city is coming in tomorrow to start proceedings." Carmen felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. The weight of the situation was too much to bear. She had worked so hard to make Hope Haven a place of safety for the children who had nowhere else to go. It wasn't just a building, it was their home. And now, in an instant, it was all being threatened. The mayor stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Carmen," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, "I understand your dedication to this place. But the truth is, Hope Haven doesn't meet the town's safety regulations. It's a liability, and we can't ignore the risks anymore." Carmen's eyes widened in shock. "Are you telling me that you're going to shut us down because of some outdated safety codes? This place is a lifeline for these kids." "We're not saying it's easy, Carmen," the mayor continued. "But we have to think about the whole town. We can't allow one shelter to put the rest of us at risk." Carmen's heart pounded in her chest, the words hitting her like a fist. "I'm not going to let you take this away," she said through gritted teeth. "This shelter isn't just some building. It's the only place these kids have. It's their only chance." The mayor's face hardened. "It's out of my hands, Carmen. The decision's been made." For a moment, Carmen stood frozen, her mind spinning. She couldn't just let this happen. She wouldn't. Not after everything. Not after the Hells Angels had stepped in to help, after the town had started to change, even if only a little. She couldn't let all of that fall apart now. "Carmen, you need to calm down," Jake said, his voice low but firm. He stepped closer to her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "This fight isn't over. We've got the law on our side. You don't have to give up." She shook her head, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I've been fighting my whole life. For my whole life. I can't just sit back and let them tear it all down now." Jake gave her a hard look, his eyes narrowing. "Then let's fight back." The tension between them was palpable. Carmen wasn't sure what she was feeling. Anger, desperation, fear. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let Hope Haven be destroyed. Not without a fight. As the bikers loaded up their bikes, the sound of their engines revving up filled the air. Carmen stood in the midst of it all, the decision weighing heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't back down, not now. But she knew the battle ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take everything she had. She turned to face the mayor and the other officials, her eyes filled with determination. "You may think you can shut us down, but I'll be damned if I let you take these kids' future away. I'll fight this with everything I have." The mayor didn't respond, but Carmen could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to fight back like this. He hadn't expected the Hells Angels to be involved. But it was too late to turn back now. The gloves were off. Carmen clenched her fists at her sides. This was no longer just about a shelter, it was about standing up for what was right. And she would do whatever it took to protect Hope Haven and the kids who had nowhere else to go. Days turned into weeks, and the battle for Hope Haven continued. Carmen poured everything she had into the fight, working tirelessly to gather support from the community, reaching out to anyone who would listen. The Hells Angels remained by her side, their unwavering support giving her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. But it wasn't just the supplies, the repairs, or the legal advice they offered. It was the way they stood with her, showing up when it mattered most. And through it all, there was Jake. Carmen had never expected to find anything like this. After everything she had gone through in life, she had built walls around her heart, keeping it safe from people who might disappoint her. But Jake was different. From the moment they had met at the gas station, something had clicked between them. It wasn't just the way he had looked at her, it was the way he had listened. He hadn't judged her for the choices she'd made or the life she had lived. He had simply seen her for who she was and offered his help, without hesitation. And now, as the sun began to set one evening, Carmen found herself standing next to him again, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten as they looked out at the shelter. The sky was streaked with shades of orange and purple, the last rays of the day casting a soft glow over the now repaired roof and freshly painted walls of Hope Haven. It was a peaceful moment, one that Carmen had fought so hard to get to. The shelter wasn't perfect, and the fight wasn't over, but at that moment it felt like they were on the edge of something real, something she could hold on to. "You know," Jake said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd be here, doing this." Carmen turned to look at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "I never thought I'd care about a place like this," he continued, his voice soft but steady. "Never thought I'd care about a lot of things, really. But then I met you, and I saw what you were doing, and it made me realize something." Carmen's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. The words she had been searching for felt just out of reach. But she didn't need to say anything right away. She just waited, letting the moment unfold. Jake took a step closer, his hand gently brushing against hers. "You've got a fire inside you, Carmen. I've seen it. And I think that's what makes this place so special. You're not just keeping these kids safe, you're showing them what it means to fight for something worth believing in." Carmen felt the heat rise in her chest. She wasn't used to being seen like this. She wasn't used to someone acknowledging the fight, the sacrifices, the constant struggle. It felt good. "You're doing the same thing," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "You and your crew, you're fighting too. You're showing up when nobody else does. And that means something to me." Jake smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I've never been great at showing my feelings. I'm not the type to get all soft on people. But I can't help it with you. You make me want to be better. And maybe that's why we're here, together. To make each other better." Carmen's heart raced, her emotions a whirlwind of surprise, hope, and something else she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: love. "Jake," she started, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. How could she put into words the way her chest tightened when he looked at her like that, the way the world seemed to slow down every time he spoke to her? Jake reached for her hand, his grip gentle but sure. "I know it's complicated. I know you've got a lot to worry about. Hell, so do I. But I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. And so is my crew." Carmen squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with emotion. For so long, she had felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The burden of Hope Haven, of the kids who needed her, of a community that had always looked the other way, it had all been too much. But with Jake by her side, it felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that they had both changed. Carmen had always been independent, never relying on anyone. But she was starting to realize that sometimes letting someone else in, letting them help, letting them care, wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "For everything. For showing up. For believing in me." Jake leaned in slightly, his forehead resting gently against hers. "You don't need to thank me. You've already done more than enough. You've changed this town. And you've changed me." For a brief moment, the world outside of Hope Haven seemed to disappear. There was no battle, no town officials, no pressure to keep things afloat. There was just Jake. Just Carmen. And the feeling of hope, growing stronger every day. Carmen took a deep breath, letting the peace of the moment wash over her. She had spent so many years trying to do everything on her own. But now, standing here with Jake, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of the fear and accept that love, just like hope, was worth fighting for. As the weeks continued to pass, the change in Plainwood became undeniable. What had once been a town defined by its indifference, its divisions, was slowly becoming something else, something better. Hope Haven wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a symbol. It was proof that even the most broken places could be mended. It wasn't just about the building, the kids, or the supplies. It was about what it represented, a community coming together, no longer divided by fear or prejudice, but united by a common goal. Carmen stood on the steps of the shelter one evening, looking out over the yard where the kids played. It had been a long road to get here, and she still didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But today was different. Today, she wasn't fighting alone. Across the yard, the bikers were gathered, unloading more boxes from their trucks, working side by side with the locals. Jake and a few other bikers were helping the mechanic from the local garage repair one of the shelter's old vans. They laughed and joked together, the divide between them and us slowly dissolving. Carmen couldn't help but smile. She had seen it with her own eyes, the transformation that was taking place, not just within the shelter, but in the town itself. People who once turned a blind eye now stopped by to offer help, to lend a hand. The old diner owner, who had once been one of Hope Haven's harshest critics, now made sure that the shelter received a hot meal at least once a week. The kids who had once been seen as trouble were now playing soccer with the town's teenagers, their laughter filling the air. It wasn't just about the work getting done. It was about the conversations, the bridges that were being built. Neighbors who had once whispered about the shelter now stopped by to ask how they could contribute. There was a sense of pride in the air, a feeling of unity that hadn't existed in Plainwood for a long time. It was clear that the town was beginning to see something they had missed before, the value of compassion, of standing together in the face of adversity. Carmen reflected on how far they had come. She remembered the first time she had stepped into Plainwood, how alone she had felt. She had fought for Hope Haven, not knowing if anyone would care, not knowing if anyone would stand by her side. But now it was different. People cared. They had come together, not just because of the shelter, but because they had seen what she and the Hells Angels had seen, that there was power in kindness, that helping one person could make an entire community stronger. Jake walked over to her, his eyes catching hers with a quiet understanding. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes spoke volumes. They had both learned something over these past weeks. Carmen had learned that it wasn't a sign of weakness to let others in. It wasn't a failure to ask for help. It was the first step toward creating something real, something lasting. And Jake had learned that, despite his past, despite the walls he had built around his own heart, he was capable of more than just survival. He was capable of love, of change, and of making a difference. "You know," Carmen said, her voice soft but firm, "I used to think that everything I did had to be done alone. I didn't think anyone else would care. But now, I see that when we come together, when we actually work together, there's nothing we can't do." Jake nodded, his lips curving into a small smile. "That's the thing, Carmen. Nobody's an island. We all need each other. You've got to be willing to fight, but you also have to be willing to accept help when it's offered." Carmen smiled back, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she was carrying the burden alone. But now, standing here with Jake, with the town, and with the kids she had fought for, she realized that the power of unity was what had made everything possible. It wasn't the donations or the supplies or the tireless work. It was the willingness to come together, to set aside differences, and to fight for something greater than oneself. The lesson was clear. Compassion wasn't a weakness. It was strength. The simple act of helping someone in need didn't just change their life, it could change the lives of everyone around them. And when people worked together, when they united with purpose, they could move mountains. They could heal communities. They could create something beautiful out of what had once been broken. As the sun set over the shelter, casting long shadows across the yard, Carmen looked around at the people she had come to call family. There was a sense of peace here now, a sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. And for the first time, Carmen felt like she had a place in this world, like she wasn't alone anymore. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult. There would always be challenges, always be obstacles. But now, she wasn't facing them alone. She had her community, her family, and the power of compassion on her side. "Here's to us," Jake said, raising a bottle of soda in a quiet toast. "To us," Carmen echoed, her heart full. And in that moment, Carmen knew that the true strength of Hope Haven wasn't in the walls or the building. It was in the people who had come together to make it what it was. The power of compassion, the strength of unity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, these were the things that could change the world. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Hope Haven became more than just a shelter. It became a testament to everything that Carmen and the people of Plainwood had fought for. The walls that had once been cracked and crumbling were now sturdy, the roof no longer leaked, and the children who had once lived in uncertainty now had a place to call home. The town had changed, and so had Carmen. She had learned the true meaning of community, the power of compassion, and, most importantly, that no fight was ever truly fought alone. Carmen stood on the steps of the shelter one last time, looking out at the kids playing in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the scene, and for the first time in a long time, Carmen felt at peace. There was no more constant worry about the future, no more sleepless nights wondering how she would keep the shelter running. There was still work to be done, still challenges ahead, but now she was no longer carrying the weight of it alone. Jake stood beside her, his presence a quiet strength, his hand resting lightly on the railing. They didn't need to speak. The years of struggle, of fighting for something bigger than themselves, had brought them closer than either of them had expected. Carmen had found a partner in Jake, not just in the fight for Hope Haven, but in life. His loyalty, his willingness to stand by her side through thick and thin, had changed her in ways she couldn't have predicted. "You did it," Jake said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "You brought this town together. You brought hope when no one else could." Carmen looked at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "We did it. All of us. This wasn't just me. It was the town, it was you, and it was the kids. We all made this happen." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the yard, where the kids were laughing, running, and playing without a care in the world. "You know, I think this place is more than just a shelter. It's a reminder of what people can do when they put their differences aside and come together." Carmen's heart swelled with pride. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time, she felt confident in the future of Hope Haven. The town of Plainwood had changed, but so had she. The walls she had built around herself had begun to crumble, and in their place there was something new, something stronger. Looking at the children, Carmen felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. She had always fought for them, but now she realized that they had fought for her too. They had given her a purpose, a reason to keep going when everything seemed lost. And in return, she had given them a chance at a better life, a place where they were seen, heard, and loved. As the last light of the day faded behind the trees, Carmen turned to Jake. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For standing by me. For believing in this place." Jake smiled softly. "There's no need to thank me. You did this, Carmen. You made it happen. And I'm proud to have been part of it." Carmen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had accomplished. Hope Haven wasn't just a place. It was a reflection of the strength, the love, and the community that had come together to create something beautiful. It was proof that no matter how dark the world seemed, there was always light to be found when people worked together. And as she stood there, watching the children play and the town that had once turned its back on her now standing beside her, Carmen knew one thing for sure: hope was real. And it was something worth fighting for.